Wait till it gets. Yeah, okay, there we go. So we are now live in Facebook land. So it should be wide. So you should be. No, I want it up. I want it up. I want it to.
You're like in the middle of the screen.
Perfect. That's where. Yeah, for now. That's where I want. Okay, because I'm not going to spend any time. I'll deal with him in a second.
Yes, you are live.
Yeah, I am live. Good. Okay. By the way, if you're watching us on Facebook Live in the room, just a little housekeeping thing, one of the things I learned, don't stress this. Don't do it on Wi-Fi. Don't stress this network any, because we had a problem with their Wi-Fi not supporting.
I'm on 4G.
Yeah. So, so that I would prefer that. Appreciate that. All right, so Rob is going to talk to us today about, you just launched a new book, right? Is that correct? And looking forward to hearing about that and how to launch our sales and build a sales organization, build sales channels, whatever else Rob wants to share with us. I'm looking forward to hearing. He's got a lot of experience, comes from KPMG, one of the competitors of the company I used to work for, and that's all right. But he's also been on his own for a while, just like I have. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So Rob Rash.
Okay, the year is 2003, okay? And Charlie decides he's going to start his first business at the age of 60. How many of you want to start your first business at the age of 60? Well, that's what Charlie did. Some of you did. Awesome. And so his route to entrepreneurship was really interesting because the thought process for this business started early in his career when he worked for the corporate world. Did anybody start, so Dave and I have been in the corporate world. Any of you guys start in the corporate world? And some of you maybe work in the corporate world. And so Charlie had what I would call idealistic expectations of his corporate world. And yet what he found out is he had to put up with overbearing bosses and unrealistic expectations. He gained millions of airline miles, right? And he spent, like a lot of us, hundreds of nights on the road away from his family. So through all this, he decides that entrepreneurship might be for him. You know, he really loved what he did. He just didn't love who he did it for. So at the age of 60 years young, or at 60 years young, he decides he wants to be an entrepreneur. So Charlie's in the fashion industry, so he decides he wants to start his own fashion line. So he designs a line of clothes for young women. And so he's all excited, and he hits the road selling his new creation. So let's fast forward. Now this was 2003, like I said. So let's fast forward to today. So we're 14 years later. And I will tell you that Charlie has achieved all of his wildest dreams. He and his family. His fashion label can actually be found in shops and boutiques all across the southern U.S. And from a monetary perspective, he's more than met all of his wildest expectations. And so I'm looking at this, and I look at his revenues. His revenues for 14 years were increasing. His profits were outstanding. And I decide I'd like to know kind of what his secret is, right? What's he done to be so successful? I would really like to know. So I interviewed him, and I asked him that very question. Charlie, what did you do? So I got the answer, and I'll tell you the answer in just a few minutes, okay? So like Dave said, so I've been in professional sales and marketing for about 21 years. I started at KPMG. But when things really changed for me is when I started to get into sales management, and I had a group, and I had a team that I had to lead. And that's where things really started to change. And the reason was now I had responsibility for not just people, but like a whole process, if you know what I mean, right? How do we do all the go-to-market stuff? You know, how do we do marketing and lead generation? What about hiring people? And what about then coaching and training? And what about all the operational part of sales? And so it's kind of like this engine I had to run. I had to get my arms around this whole thing. And so I started to do research. What are the best practices out there to be successful in building like this sales process? What do people do to be successful? And so I started to search this out. And what's really interesting, if you've ever done this, I bet a lot of you guys have, I go to Amazon or I go to Google Books and I'm looking for authoritative resources, right? And everything that most of what I'm finding is how to be successful as an individual salesperson, right? How to sell as an individual. And that was the vast majority. And there's some really good stuff. If you guys like to read, Zig Ziglar, bless his heart, he's been dead for, 5-6 years. He's still got, in the top 20, he's still got 3 bestsellers in the top 20 of sales books. Mm-hmm. The guy's a legend, right? Brian Tracy, great stuff. If you like spin selling, great book, Spin Selling, Neil Rackham. So there's a lot of great material, but here's what I couldn't find, and I can give you those later if you'd like more titles. But here's what I couldn't find. How do I build like the whole jigsaw puzzle? Because these were just like little pieces of the puzzle. How do I build the whole jigsaw puzzle? And that's what I was looking for. And honestly, that's what I was struggling with. So I got on this quest, right, this journey. How do I do this? So what that led to is this. I did all my own research. I went back 21 years of history. Dave's got a handout for you, just so you can give you some thought-provoking ideas. But I really wanted to document from all the best practices that are out there that I could find. How do I build this, what I call the machine, right? The sales engine. How do I build that? And what are the steps to do that? And so that's why I decided to write the book. And obviously being a consultant in this area, one of the first questions I get from my clients is, Rob, this sounds great. What exactly are you going to do for me? So I hear that. I don't know if you ever hear that. I hear that a lot. So I decided, you know what? I better have a really good answer to that because I know it's coming. So here's what I think of the book. The book to me is what I would call a recipe book for sales success. That's really what I look at it as. And so if you follow the steps of a recipe, normally you're fairly successful. So speaking of engine, right? So I mentioned the sales engine. So if we go out in the parking lot and you and I jump in your car and we try and merge onto Central Expressway here, but the car only gets up to 30 miles an hour. And we're in the right-hand lane, but we're at 30 miles an hour. What's going to happen to us?
Rear-ended.
It's not going to be pretty, is it? Right? So, and really, I find the same is true from a sales and a business perspective. Because there are folks in the left-hand lane that have figured this out, right, from a business perspective, our competitors. And they're going to smoke us if we haven't figured out the sales part, the sales machine, the sales engine. And so one of the messages I wanted to deliver, and I think you all know this, but I just like to deliver this message, that number one, you absolutely have got to have a sales engine running your business. And it can't run at 30, it's got to run at 70. Or in this town, maybe 80, 85. Right? But it's got to run at 100% all the time. All right, so if we believe we need a sales engine, then how do we build one? That's a great question. So I realize there's some ladies in here, maybe some of you guys like to cook. My wife is a really good cook, she really is. So I've been married for, this October will be 35 years, believe it or not.
All right.
So
Congratulations.
she's awesome, but she's a really good cook. And so what she does is she records all these cooking shows. You guys ever watch these cooking shows like Ree Drummond and who's the other one? You guys.
Clay.
Yeah.
Bobby Clay.
So she loves these cooking shows. So on Saturday morning she binge watches these cooking shows, And so I'm walking through the room, and what's really interesting about these shows is they start with these really basic, ordinary ingredients, right? And by the end of the show, what do they have? This unbelievable work of art, right? I just want to like reach through the TV and grab that thing and eat it right there. I mean, it's amazing. And what I always say to her is, oh, honey, her name's Janet. I said, honey, you got to get that recipe. And of course, they post all their recipes online, right? I mean, it's not. So, but I'm a lousy cook, so I couldn't do it. But she's a great cook, so she can take the recipe and make something out of it. Right? I mean, she does it quite frequently. It's like amazing. So that's kind of my analogy for sales success is there is a recipe you can follow. And in my experience in the sales world, and I've been on the insides of tons and tons of organizations, I've dealt with I don't know how many salespeople over time. And that's why I say I really wanted to put this in book form, because I feel like that there's a very common recipe for sales success. And so let's do this. Let's talk about some of these quick basic ingredients. On your handout there's some of them. I won't run through all of that, I promise. But there's just some of the basic ingredients, and that kind of follows what you have on your sheet there, follows really kind of the first 4 chapters of the book. So here's what I find when I walk into an organization is we really have got to address a lot of the fundamental sales issues before we get to things like sales training and all that stuff. That, I think, comes a little bit down the road. So let me give an example. So there was a young man, and this is kind of like the first ingredient, and what I call the go-to-market strategy, right? So let me talk about that. So there's a young man, he's in his very first sales job. He's hardworking, he's ambitious. Oh, and by the way, his wife has just had her second child, so she's now a full-time stay-at-home mom. He's the sole breadwinner. It would not be unusual for him to wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat wondering how they were going to make it. And he was working for a big-name corporate client, and he thought, wow, this is really great. I'm working for a big company. They're going to train me in all their sales process. I'm going to learn what they do, and I'm on my way to sales success, right? So he gets to his job, and he starts asking questions like, so who are the right clients to call on, right? And what kind of value do we provide those clients? And what are their needs? Not just their basic needs, like what are their intimate needs? Because the buyer on the other side of the table is a human. What's his needs, right? And how do we get to know all these needs? So he starts asking all these questions. And what he finds out is, after hitting the street and getting involved with his clients, what he finds out is this company hasn't really defined any of that at all. And it's a very immature, what I call go-to-market strategy, which is the first part of the sales process. And this is if I told you the name, you would know the name. So he's very disappointed. He learns by the school of hard knocks. It's a good lesson. And if you haven't guessed by now, that young man was me. So I've lived through all this stuff, believe me. I've taken it in the teeth through everything I'm going to talk to you about. And so let's review for a second. And on your sheet, it's there. But when we talk about go-to-market strategy, what am I talking about? Well, first of all, it's what I call who is the ideal client. Who really is and not just, because I see a lot of organizations, they'll take anything, right? A lot of salespeople, but who is the ideal client? And let's talk about the most profitable client. And a lot of you have figured that out, right? But a lot of folks haven't. I'm shocked. Organizations haven't. Who are the most profitable clients? Who are going to be the best repeat clients? So it's thinking through the long-term piece of who is our clientele, what I call the ideal client. And then what are their needs? Like I said, it's not just general needs, gosh, they need, my widget. There's something deeper than that. It solves a problem, what you do, right? And there's an emotional attachment to that. And how do we get there? And then finally, the big one for me is what I call the value proposition. Now this is a pet peeve of mine, because I run into this all the time. A lot of folks really can't articulate to me or to their client what kind of value they create. So why should I trade my hard-earned money for what you do? Man, you got to have that down to a science, right? We got to know. Now here's the best thing. Here's what I tell people is that's not a made-up value proposition. How can you substantiate it? What is the real value? And how, here's the thing that I tell my teams, is the guy who can actually prove it and authenticate it, right, and stand behind it, they're the guys that win the day. All right, so ingredient number one, I won't spend any more time on that. We could go a lot deeper on go-to-market strategy, but here's what I find. In a lot of organizations we deal with that have an ineffective go-to-market strategy, their sales productivity, no kidding, is probably 30, 40, 50% of what it should be. Because a lot of times what they're doing is they're calling on the wrong clients, selling the wrong deals, not enough repeat business, all this. So you add up all the different parameters, and their productivity is very low. when we fix that, it's amazing what happens, right? Sales productivity goes through the roof. It does jump 20, 30, 40% just by fixing that one area, having the right go-to-market strategy. It is amazing. All right, the second one, so the next big ingredient, one I'll talk about, is what I call preparing the environment for sales success, right? Setting the stage for sales success. And so let me tell you another story. So I grew up here in the area, right? I grew up in Garland, lived there a long time, graduated from North Carolina High School. I'm a local kid. So I'm like 9 or 10 years old, and youth soccer here in this area has been like big forever, right? Even when I was a kid,
Yep.
which wasn't too long ago. Just kidding. And so my brother and I, he's a little bit younger than I, so we joined this youth soccer team, right? Like 9, 10 years old. So we go up to the local park, Bradfield Elementary, and so we take our ball, and I don't even think it's a soccer ball. I think it's like, a volleyball or something like that. And we don't have any equipment or uniforms, or we certainly don't have the right shoes for soccer and that sort of thing. But we go up to the field. Now this is like the 70s, right? There is not a soccer field in sight, right? So we make up our own, right? So there's like no, if you will, lines drawn on how we play. We have to make up our own. And there's certainly no goal to shoot for. So here's what we do. We take those big round barrels, they use for trash cans, and we drag the barrels up, we put them up against the wall, and we form our own goal. And like I said, our equipment, well, it's substandard. And so then we grab our dad. And so my dad grew up playing football, right, in the 50s. Well, he knows nothing about soccer, but he's a good dad, so he's going to come to the park and he's going to play with his kids. So he comes up to the park and he's playing with us, and he realizes after about 15 minutes, I know nothing about this sport. So he hangs out for a little while, but we relieve him of his duties and kick him off. So we don't really have a coach. So my brother Randall and I, we're just kind of making it up as we go. So I tell you that because that is so similar to what I see in so many sales teams. I'm working with a couple of clients right now where I'm describing literally their situation, and here's what I mean. A lot of the sales process that people go through is really not well defined, meaning when I talk about sales process, to me the most important, how do you qualify your opportunities? Because a lot of people, here's the number one time waster in sales, chasing unqualified deals, the biggest time waste. And a lot of organizations haven't taught their teams how do they qualify their deals. So that that lines on the pavement, right, that we're supposed to play in a game, right, those aren't defined for the sales team. How to qualify, how to propose properly, how to articulate your value proposition, the proposal process, the follow-up process, all of that. A lot of organizations really haven't defined that very well. You'd be shocked. And so the next thing that we find is a lot of organizations really don't have the right equipment. Meaning, so here's a symptom I hear a lot is, I'll talk to salespeople and I say, what could the company do for you to help you be more successful? And you know what they say is like, man, our website is terrible. When are we ever going to get a decent website, right? It just makes us look bad. A basic website, right? These days, you've got to have one. Sales tools, right? I still like to have a little bit of a leave behind, right? So everybody's online, of course, but I still like to leave something in somebody's hands if it's appropriate. So there's so many things you could do from a tool perspective to be successful. What about sales training? Now this is where I do jump on the bandwagon of training is once we have a lot of things in order, then it's time to train. And I find a lot of organizations actually underspend on training. And then finally, my really, the big one, the pet peeve for me is coaching. You can't believe, so that's why George is here, right? I know that I need a coach, right? And you by now probably have figured out, Rob needs a coach. But that's why I have a coach, right? Because I know I need a coach. And so, is it hard? No, not really. Because if I listen, right, there'll be tons and tons of improvement down the road. And that's what I find for sales teams is somebody looking from the other side and giving that advice is absolutely invaluable. So hats off to you guys for being part of this, for having coaches, for getting advice. You can't believe how far ahead of the game you are for doing that. So let me back up for a second. When we can fix all of those things, right, can you imagine the improvement in sales productivity when we get all those things working right. And now imagine all those things working right and they're calling on the right target market. Wow. And literally, sales improvement can be 40, 50, 60%. I'm working with a company right now where we've documented, and it wasn't very hard, but we've documented where they are now in performance compared to where they should be. And it's amazing. They're about a third of where they should be in performance due to all these issues that I'm talking to you about. So it's absolutely staggering. But when we get them fixed, it's unbelievable, right? When we follow the ingredients, we do the recipe, it really does work. Okay, so last example for you. So I need your help. So I'd like to play a little game of word association. Okay, so everybody with me? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say a word, and if you would, in your mind, I'd like you to form either a positive impression or a negative impression. Just in general. I'm going to say the word, nothing specific, but do you generally feel positive or generally feel negative? Okay, you ready? Mm-hmm. Here's the word. Salesperson. How many of you said negative? Isn't that interesting? Now, we're all in sales, aren't we? Isn't that interesting, right? Okay, so here's my point. Me too. I'd raise my hand too, right? So here's my point. Let's say you're an individual seller. Let's say you have responsibility for coaching or training others. Let's say you may hire some salespeople someday. How does all that, and I'm not trying to overstep here, but maybe negative stereotype, how does that affect your own performance, right? And yet, how does that affect the performance of people around you, or maybe the teams that you might eventually employ? How do you think that happens, right?
Try to avoid the things I find annoying.
Exactly. And so let's talk about that for a second. When I said negative, and you raised your hand, one, what would you say?
It pushes me further away from the sale.
Yeah. You don't like to be sold, you'd rather buy. Is that, anybody else? What were you thinking?
Well, actually, it's positive, but I think this the preponderance of my experiences have been with people who aren't really effective salespeople.
Right.
That basically they are trying to push or sell versus allowing me and enabling me to understand why I need to buy.
Yeah. Anybody else like to volunteer? I'd love to hear your answers.
Pushy was my word too.
Pushy? Yeah. So, and we've all seen the images on TV and movies, right? And it's easy to portray salespeople in movies. Like, you ever seen, was it Glenn Ross?
Yeah.
You know, Alec Baldwin does the ABC, always be closing. You ever heard that talk?
Yeah.
Whew, man, that is intense. And then the one I wouldn't recommend, I caught pieces of it on YouTube, but the movie is extremely vulgar, but that's The Wolf of Wall Street, you know, in that whole speech. Oh my gosh, it sets your hair on fire, right? So don't listen to that one. Do you remember the movie True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? And he goes to buy the Corvette at the car lot, right? You remember? I don't know if you remember that. Mm-hmm. And Bill Paxton is the sales guy. You remember that? Oh my God. So no wonder we have all these images of salespeople, right? It is amazing.
Well, particularly car sales.
Particularly car salesmen, but
used car sales.
yeah. But then what we do is we translate that right over to any other salespeople, right? So we have got to get past that. So let me share some actual real data with you. How's that for a second? Some real data. Who are the most successful salespeople? So there's a lot of really good studies out there on this, and I've read a bunch of them. And these are studies where they'll look at top performers in professional industries who succeed year after year after year. What does that person look like? And what are their best character qualities? And if you want more detail, I just wrote a blog post on this about a week ago on our website. You can go look at it. Olympia-consulting.net. So I just wrote, and we blog about every week on these topics, so feel free. So there's one very authoritative study. There's a particular individual that I work with to help me evaluate and grade and select salespeople. He's a PhD industrial psychologist, extremely well-versed in sales success and what it takes to find successful salespeople. And his name is Dr. Ron Trago. His website is gotrago.com. He's a local guy. And here's what he's found. After giving professional testing assessments to tens of thousands of people, there's 5 really strong traits that he finds make up a strong salesperson. So let's talk about that for a second. Well, actually, let's do something better. Let me tell you about a person that I know that I'm personally acquainted with. Her name is Christina. And let me describe her to you, because you probably know people like this. That probably be a funner way to do it. So the first thing about Christina that you may notice when you start to talk to her is she's like really smart. She's got above average intelligence. Like she's got a lot going for her, right up here. She really does. And the reason for that, and what we find in any type of sales, especially something of a professional nature, is good salespeople are really good problem solvers. And so what her clients will do is they'll give her, or she'll ask for, a tough problem. And then here's what she'll do, is she'll move heaven and earth to help them get it. Now that's really a differentiator for her. So number one, she's extremely smart. Number two, it's what Dr. Trago calls always in motion. She's just one of those people that's always moving. She's a couple of networking clubs. She's got a lot of hobbies going on. She's very involved and very committed to her profession. She just doesn't sit around much, right? You may be that type of person. I consider myself that type of person. So always constantly in motion. So a very high energy level, right? So she's smart. She's got high energy level. The next one that you find, now this is all like scientific data through thousands of evaluations, the top 5 traits. The third one is she's really persistent, meaning, as you would expect, we all have tough days, right? There's a lot of stuff that happens. There's a lot of stuff that can be discouraging in sales, right? Not everybody says yes, amazingly. And yet, Christina learns how to keep going, and she just keeps going, right? And because she knows what happened yesterday has no bearing on today whatsoever. So she's very persistent. The next one is, and this is actually one of my favorites because having run a decent sized business, this is something we really look for a lot. And that is what what Dr. Trago calls emotional stability. Meaning she's never too high or never too low. She's always kind of in control of her emotions. I would kind of call that maturity level. She's just a mature person, right? Somebody says something that offends her, hey, stuff happens, right? She doesn't get all upset. She doesn't have to call me on the phone and talk, I don't have to talk her off the ledge and all that kind of, hey, she can get over it, right? She's just a very emotionally stable. She's actually quite mature. And then the last one, as you might expect for a salesperson, is just she's very competitive. She loves to get the commission check, right? She's working on a degree. She's working on having her own business. The reason I know her is she wants to learn how to start her own business in a few years. So she's already laying the groundwork now for a future business down the road. Pretty amazing, right? So she's very competitive. So, okay. So let's look at the ideal salesperson, right? Compare the stereotype, then compared to the ideal. And here's the thing about the ideal is I've interfaced and interacted with, I don't know how many, hundreds, maybe thousands, right? And I will tell you that my experience lines up with the data more than it does the stereotype. And I'm talking about most salespeople, professional salespeople I know, doing well in their profession have nothing to do with the stereotype. So I really have to, same thing as you guys do, I have to flush that, right? And have to really focus on the right characteristics. Okay, so if we look at this whole recipe thing for a minute, right? This recipe for organizational success. Let's assume for a minute that we have a really well-defined go-to-market strategy. And that's chapter 1 of the book, and I go into that in gory detail. And then let's assume that we have the stage set for sales success, right? All the things we talked about, the proper training, the proper tools. And one other thing I want to say about that stage, is what I find is a lot of us are pretty good evangelists for what we do, right? So Zip, I think you're a pretty good evangelist for what you do. A lot of us are, right? We believe in what we do. We like what we do. We love to tell other people about what we do. If you ever get around to others and you've got to start transferring that knowledge, how do we get those folks to be evangelists? Now that is a real kicker of a challenge. And if we don't give them all those things, right, that go-to-market strategy, that proper environments for sales success, and then the last thing I would say is, do we even just have the right people? Are we the right people? And what I tell people is, okay, you know the characteristics, and what I've always thought, and I've even talked to George about this, as I develop my speaking skills and I work on that, and I look at professional speakers, I'm like, they just blow my mind, their skill sets, right? It's like, how do they do that? And I look at that and I go, they're just human, and that is a learned skill. Mm-hmm. That's what I say. They're just human, and that is learned. I can learn that too, right? I don't care how long it takes me, because if I need to do that, I need to do that. So I take those 5 characteristics and I look at those and I go, if I need to work on one of those to be a better salesperson, I will, because my whole livelihood depends on it. Okay, so let's take those ingredients, we put them together. Can you imagine that a team of Christinas, right, with all the right environmental stuff around them, calling on the right markets? Can you imagine how that changes a business? Let me tell you, it blows the lid off from a success perspective. And so that's what we do at Olympia, is we help people build those type of environments. And so we enter into conversations with companies all the time that are experiencing one or more of those symptoms, if you will, for sales success. So maybe you're missing one of those ingredients. Maybe you need some cooking skills. There's no telling what it takes to be successful, right? But the book is really written to help folks figure out, am I missing some pieces? Do I need to do something a little differently? Do I need to follow a different process? That's why we really come up with the book. So let me finish my Charlie story for you that I started. So Charlie's a friend of mine now that I've gotten to know him. And so I interviewed him about his business, right? Why was he so successful? Why at 60 would he ever dream of starting a business? And so he's now 70, he just turned 74 last week. And he's literally at the beach. But we had lunch a few weeks ago, and I asked him, and I said, Charlie, tell me about all this. I said, was there 1 or 2 things that you think made you really successful? And so we're having a really good time. We're really just visiting, just like today. And what he does, I asked him that, and the whole tone of the meeting changes. And he sits up in his chair, and he puts his finger out on the table, just like this. And he looks me right in the eye, and he says, Rob, he said, we have hundreds of competitors in the clothing industry, all with really good products. But he said, one thing I figured out that I had over the other guys, because I figured out that I could be like a sales machine, a sales engine, and I could outsell them. So he said, we'd set a goal for new clients, and we'd reach it, and he said, and we'd set another goal. And we'd set a new goal for more clients, and we'd reach it, and then we'd set another goal. And he said, for 14 years, we never stopped setting these outrageous sales goals. He said, I think that's the secret to our success. Then he said something I'll never forget, and I love this quote. He goes, Rob, he said, we were a relentless sales machine. And if I had to sum it up, everything I've just said, I think that's it, right? Success is a relentless sales machine in business. So it's been great being with you, Dave. Thanks for having me. Q&A time? Can we do that?
Yeah.
Is it time for Q&A?
Sure, go for it.
Jenna? Did you have a
Telling
question?
everyone to ask
It is
questions.
Q&A time.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So is your book written predominantly to aid sales organizations, or do you think that it would help organizations of one, people selling?
I really do think it would help organizations of one, because if you look at the basic principles of just how anybody sells, right? And if even you're a business of one, right? So it was written for businesses large and small. Yeah. Oh, good question.
Great.
Yes, ma'am.
Kind of not about sales, but.
That's okay.
So, George is your coach.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you get nervous when he writes? Like, what did I do wrong? Just joking.
No.
I kind of wondered that. I was like, notes or
No,
sales
because
or...
it's just going to help me, honestly, in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's a journey thing, and there's a lot of work to do, but same thing. That's the reason I'm here. I mean, you guys have a lot of things you got to do to be successful. So do I. So I'm just
He did.
I'm proof of that.
Yes, George.
I'll share.
Yes.
Yes, I am taking notes.
Yes.
But they're overall very positive
All
notes.
right.
And I'm going to be able to give him very positive feedback. And if he was to say, how did I do? I'd say, 2 thumbs up. You did it. And you got started. And that's where most people never get started.
Yeah.
You're a little passionate.
I am, kind of.
That's
That's
okay.
true. That's true. Okay. Let's, appreciate it. Thank you, Rob. Let's give him Yeah, for those that are,
Yes, sir.
thank you, launch your sales. Obviously, he didn't get through everything on here, but I will tell you, for those, especially those of you in the Business Growth Network, do you recognize any similarities here?
Oh, yeah.
There's things here. If you focus on sales, and the thing is, we were talking, Rob and I were talking beforehand, and, you know, it's about, we all want to say, well, it's unique. This is what his background is corporate. My background is corporate. My background is also other things too. And the reality of it is the best principles work across the board. In sales, we're all in sales. Some of us do it better than others. But the reality of it is that this book and the little tool check sheet that he gave us here is a good way to structure. If you can't answer these questions or don't have it, then these are things that we need to work on. And whether you work with Rob and Olympia Consulting, or whether you work with, find somebody you resonate with, find a coach, find a thing.
By the way, we have a website called launchyoursales.com, and we're putting a lot of tools out there, just free tools to download. So we have lots of things we add to it regularly. So feel free to take advantage of that. It's all good free stuff.
Well, I appreciate that. Appreciate you. We have training next Friday for those they're here. Obviously, we have our Wednesday meeting, so be here. Be sure and go to the meetup calendar and RSVP. This talk was streamed to Business Growth Network Facebook page. So, and did you tag Rob and everything?
I don't have
Well,
any
we'll
tag.
tag
He
Rob.
doesn't have a Facebook page for his company, so you can tag that.
Okay, well, we'll work with him on that, so but anyway, so, no, we'll get that going, but we'll get it out there, and feel free to share it, encourage people. It'll also be on our Richardson Plano Facebook group, so again, encourage people to be here. Again, Rob, you did an awesome job, appreciate it. George, your coaching is working, does he have anything to do with it? Is it, he didn't mess up the technology this time, so that was a good thing. By the way, George is coming back to talk to us again.
Don't tell them that, they won't show up.
In July. In July, so
Newer, better stuff.
That's right.
I'll warn you when I'll be sure and promote. He's actually already. Actually, if you go out into July, you can find the date that he's there because I've already got him on the calendar. But anyway, appreciate the Facebook Live audience. Appreciate everybody here. We'll see you back. I didn't collect the dollars. Make sure if you're first time here that I get your, I see them. But make sure I get your business card so I can get you on the recent guests list, so that we'll have you, other people can refer people to you here. But we're all marketing. We all are a team. Let's help each other out. Have a good week and a good weekend. Thanks, guys. Thanks again, Rob.
Okay, bud. See you.
Ron, you can take that. If you put in the top right hand
Thank you.
corner, you can get a bend in.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.